My name is Ivy. I'm 29 years old, and on the night Gabriel Dufresne, the Michelin-starred chef I'd worked under for 6 years, hurled me out of his kitchen in front of the entire brigade, shouting, "You're just a kitchen hand. I am the art." I untied my apron, hung it on the hook by the door, and walked out into a freezing November rain. In the pocket of my jacket was a flash drive containing the technical binders for every dish that had ever gone out of that dining room, from the earliest amateur menu to the latest tasting course. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from that particular brand of glacial calm that sets in when you've been betrayed by the people you gave everything to. Chef Gabriel, a man with a television face and a calculator for a soul, believed I was nobody, just a pair of hands he'd blessed with a spot at his stove. He was wrong. I walked down the empty street, my kitchen clogs ticking against the wet asphalt like a metronome, steady, hollow, unstoppable. A little over a month later, Gabrielle's lawyers would show up at my pop-up, Salt, demanding I shut the place down, and in that moment, I'd understand that revenge isn't a dish served cold. It's a tasting menu I plate myself. But before I tell you what I said to those lawyers and how the story ended, drop a comment. What time is it where you are, and what city are you reading from? I really do wonder how far this story will reach. Let's start at the beginning. My life with food didn't start in a restaurant or even at culinary school. It started in my grandmother's tiny fourth-floor walk-up in Queens when I was 7 and my sister Iris was 7 too, because we're twins. We were born 12 minutes apart, identical down to the last detail. 2 skinny blonde girls with gray eyes and a habit of finishing each other's plates. Grandma, who raised us after our parents' divorce, worked as a line cook in a factory cafeteria and came home late with no energy to cook, so Iris and I started making meals for ourselves. First boxed mac and cheese, then soups, then trickier things. I'd stand on a stool to reach the stove while Iris sat on the windowsill reading recipes aloud from a tattered copy of The Joy of Cooking that Grandma kept like a relic. Even then, it was obvious which way we'd go. I loved cooking. She loved watching me cook and finding the beauty in it. When I turned 10, she got her first camera, and instead of taking selfies, she photographed my hands, kneading dough, whisking eggs, slicing herbs into paper-thin ribbons. Grandma used to look at us and say, "You two are like 2 sides of a coin, one heads, one tails, but together you're a fortune." She was right.
When we were 12, the thing that tore us apart happened. Our parents, who by then had started talking again and were even trying to patch the family back together, were in a car crash. Our father died at the scene. Our mother passed a day later in the ICU. Iris and I were supposed to be taken in together, but our father's sister, a woman with a law degree and a heart made of dry clay, decided twins were too expensive and too much trouble. She took custody of me, and Iris was sent to another relative in another state, and from that day our paths split. We wrote letters because we didn't have the internet, and then my aunt moved and changed her number, and the connection went dead. I remember Iris's last letter. "I'll find you when I grow up, and then we'll open a restaurant, and it'll be the best one in the world." I kept that letter inside the old cookbook we'd learned from, and I reread it every year. 17 years passed. I trained as a chef, worked a string of jobs, from a grill at a gas station diner to a banquet kitchen where 6 of us cranked out 300 covers a night, did a stage at a tiny bistro outside Lyon where the chef taught me to respect every scrap of food because even trimmings could become stock. Then, at 23, I landed a job at a young, ambitious restaurant called Gabriel. The owner and executive chef, Gabriel Dufresne, a French-American with a television host's polish, was looking for a sous chef who wouldn't just execute orders but create. I walked into the interview with a binder of recipes I'd developed over the years, and after flipping through them, he said, "You get the spot if you can tell me how to make a mousse that doesn't smell like fish." I could. A week later, I was on his line. The first few years, I was happy. Gabrielle climbed, first the city guides, then the best of lists, then 2 years after I arrived, it earned its first Michelin star. For the restaurant, it felt like the Olympics, and that night, Gabriel gathered the whole brigade, poured champagne for everyone, and gave a speech about how we were all family, and the win belonged to every one of us, from the dishwasher to the chef. I stood in the corner, exhausted to the point of tinnitus, but happy. I thought I'd found a home. I remember walking the whole way back to my apartment in the snow because I couldn't catch a cab, the flakes falling in huge clumps, thinking, we did it. We really did it. I was still saying we then. The kitchen at Gabriel was my world. I'd arrive at 8 in the morning, still dark, and start by walking the walk-ins, checking mise en place, smelling the produce, touching the fish, feeling the texture of the dough that had been proofing overnight. Gabriel would roll in around 10, camera ready, and begin his rounds with an espresso in one hand and his phone in the other. He didn't cook. He tasted, gave notes, tweaked plating, and then went out to the dining room to schmooze and pose for photos. All the heavy lifting, menu development, technical binders, food cost spreadsheets, training new cooks, and overseeing prep fell to me. I called it the second line. He called it, you handle it, darling. And I handled it. I loved that the restaurant was alive and growing, and I didn't think much about who got the public credit, until I started noticing that Gabriel said I more and more, and we less and less.
The first red flag came when a food magazine interviewed him and he described how he created the signature dish, duck leg confit with celery root puree and a black currant sauce. I had created that dish, completely. I tinkered with it for weeks, texting him photos of trial versions in the middle of the night, and he'd always reply, "Great, put it on the menu." But in the interview, the line was, "I was sitting on the terrace of my house in Provence, sipping a Bordeaux, and suddenly it hit me, duck and black currant, it'll be a revolution." I read that sitting in the staff break room and felt something tighten inside. Not resentment, more like a chill, as if someone had dripped ice essence into warm water. One of the servers, Laura, came over and asked, "Ivy, why are you so pale?" I showed her the magazine. She skimmed it and whistled. "Wow, you came up with that, didn't you?" I nodded. "So what are you going to do?" I shrugged. "Nothing." I genuinely believed I didn't need to do anything, that talent would speak for itself, that justice would somehow work itself out. I was naive. The second flag dropped when Gabriel hired an ambitious intern, a young guy named Leo, the nephew of some friend of his. Leo couldn't cook, but he had ambitions the size of the Empire State Building and a grin Gabriel liked. I had to teach him from scratch how to hold a knife, how to prep artichokes, how to judge meat temperature by touch. He'd nod, smile, then do everything wrong, and I'd have to fix it. Once he switched the mise en place and sent out a sauce that had been sitting in the wrong cooler 2 days too long. I caught it at the last second, the plate already under the heat lamp, and swapped it out. Gabriel found out and praised Leo for his quick thinking, then told me, "Ivy, you're too hard on the guy. Give him some space. He's got talent." I swallowed and said nothing. Over time, the tension on the line thickened. Gabriel sniped at me in front of the crew more and more, dropping the condescending tone he used to reserve for externs. "Don't get clever, just do it. Your job is to execute, not to have opinions. If you're unhappy, the door's open. I'm not forcing anyone to stay." I listened and kept working because the restaurant was as much my baby as his. I knew every cranny of the walk-in, every scratch on the prep table, every sigh of the hood vents. I couldn't just walk away. It would have felt like abandoning my own child. But it got clearer every day. Gabriel saw me not as a partner, but as a consumable, a battery you toss when it stops giving juice.
The blow-up came on that November night. A month earlier, Gabriel had been shortlisted for a major national award, and he was hosting a gala dinner for critics. I designed an 8-course menu, including an intricate dessert, a chocolate sphere with a mango cream center, shattered with hot caramel. The idea had come to me at 3 in the morning while I was flipping through an old molecular gastronomy book. I sketched it on a napkin, went to the market at dawn for fresh mangoes, and started testing. 3 nights I was the last one out, checking and rechecking every step. The chocolate had to be precisely 90 degrees Fahrenheit, or it either cracked or didn't melt. The mango cream had to be whisked by hand because a mixer overworked it and it split. The caramel had to be made a minute before plating, not a second sooner. I documented everything, down to the angle of the spoon. Leo hung around the whole time, asking questions and scribbling notes. Though I later learned he wasn't writing down the recipe, he was cataloging my mistakes to report to Gabriel. Gala night arrived. The room was packed. Critics, journalists, a few celebrity guests for atmosphere. I stood in the kitchen calling the passes, mise, sauces, garnishes, timing. We hummed. The first 7 courses landed one after another, and through the pass window I could hear the gasps and clapping. Only dessert remained. That's when the thing I'd feared most happened. Leo, who was responsible for final assembly on the dessert, mixed up the temperature protocol. Instead of putting the finished spheres into a blast freezer for 10 minutes to stabilize, he slid them into a regular fridge. I spotted it 3 minutes before the fire, the spheres already sweating and losing their shape. Panic grabbed my throat, but I held it down. I knew I had backups. I always made backup spheres because my perfectionism wouldn't let me risk it. I flew to the freezer, pulled the backups, plated them, and dessert went out on time. The guests raved. Critics jotted glowing notes. The disaster was averted. But after service, Gabriel assembled the brigade in the dining room and started screaming. He screamed not at Leo, but at me. He stood in front of the line of cooks, red-faced, veins bulging at his temples, spittle flying. "You almost killed the dinner, the whole night, 7 courses, flawless, and then you," he jabbed a finger at me, "you nearly wrecked dessert. Leo caught your mistake in time and reported it to me. If it hadn't been for him, we'd have been humiliated in front of everyone." I stood there watching Leo nod with a pious face, playing hero. I watched the brigade, cooks, servers, dishwashers, all drop their eyes to the floor. Not one of them said a word. They all stayed silent. Not because they agreed with Gabriel, but because they were scared. Scared of losing their jobs, scared of the chef's temper, scared of ending up where I was. I understood them. It didn't make it any easier.
"You're incompetent," Gabriel went on. "You're a nobody I picked up out of pity 6 years ago. You think you matter? You're just a kitchen hand, and I am the art. Art, you understand? I create, I breathe soul into these walls, and you just stir a spoon. And if you think you can talk back to me, you're delusional." He grabbed my apron from its hook by the kitchen entrance and hurled it at my feet. The apron was old, faded, stained with sauces, with the monogram IK, Ivy Keller, stitched on the chest. I bent down, picked it up, hung it carefully back on the hook. I took my technical cards binder off the shelf. I pulled the flash drive, the one I'd had the foresight to back up a month earlier, out of my coat pocket. Then I looked around the kitchen, my kitchen, where 6 years of my life had passed, and said in a voice so level that, according to Laura, the room went colder than the walk-in. "All right, Gabriel, the art stays here. The kitchen hand is leaving. Goodbye." I walked out into the rain. I didn't look back. I walked, gripping the flash drive in my pocket, tears running down my face and mixing with the rain. But inside me, what grew wasn't despair. It was a new, unfamiliar kind of resolve. I didn't yet know exactly what I would do, but I knew I would do something that would make him choke on his art. The first few days after I was fired, I lay on my couch staring at the ceiling. The flash drive sat on my coffee table, and I looked at it the way you look at a weapon you haven't figured out how to use yet. I had years' worth of technical binders, not just recipes, but step-by-step protocols for every dish, with temperature curves, plating photos, micro-timing. Nobody but me knew that those binders were what had kept Gabriel on the rails for the past several years. Gabriel, so long absent from the actual kitchen, had lost touch with the processes and blindly trusted my spreadsheets without ever grasping the details. Without my daily adjustments, things would start to fall apart, not instantly, but inevitably. Leo, whom Gabriel was pushing forward, clearly couldn't handle even the basics. But that wasn't enough. Just sitting around waiting for the restaurant to decline would mean letting Gabriel keep pretending to be a genius. I didn't want him ruined. I wanted him to finally shut up and hear the truth. I wanted everyone to hear it. I spent hours at my own stove, sifting through old notes and remembering my grandmother. She used to say, "Ivy, food isn't just calories, it's a language, and if someone steals your words, don't scream. Cook a dish so powerful it makes the thief sick on his own lies." I didn't understand that as a kid. I understood it now. I couldn't sue, recipes aren't protected by copyright, and formally, everything had been developed inside the restaurant's walls, though my contract didn't have a clear clause assigning away the rights to my personal creations. I couldn't complain to the guild, Gabriel was connected there, but I could cook those dishes again under my own name and plate them in such a way that every bite screamed who had created them, and that's when I decided to find Iris.
Finding my sister turned out to be harder than I'd expected. I dug through social media, called every one of Grandma's old contacts, even sent a query to the archive of a culinary photography contest where I remembered her name popping up. It took a couple of weeks to get a lead and another week to work up the courage to contact her. I was terrified she wouldn't want to see me, that the wound of all those lost years would be stronger than blood. Finally, I sent a message to her professional account. "Hi, it's Ivy. If you remember making mac and cheese on a stool, reply. I need your help." For 2 days, nothing. I'd started to think it was hopeless when, on the third morning, a short reply came. "I remember. Address, tonight, wait." And that evening, I was standing in front of her loft. We met in her studio, a huge open space in a converted warehouse in Bushwick that smelled of coffee, darkroom chemicals, and, inexplicably, fresh bread. The walls were covered with enormous food photographs, bowls of soup, desserts, meat plates, shot with such attention to texture you wanted to eat them with your eyes. Iris met me at the door, and we stood there a full minute, just looking at each other. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt that read, "I don't eat, I photograph," her hair twisted in a messy bun, paint smudges on her fingers, she painted on the side. Then she stepped forward, wrapped her arms around me, and we both cried. Right there in the doorway, bawling like the kids we'd been when they separated us. Once the tears ran out, she sat me down, poured tea, and said, "Tell me everything." I told her. Everything. Gabriel, the stolen credit, the flash drive, the firing. Iris listened without interrupting, and I could see her nostrils flaring, a dead giveaway that she was furious. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "Do you have the technicals for every dish he serves?" "Yes." "And do you have photos of you cooking them?" "I don't, but—" "I do," she cut in. "I shot promo material for Gabriel 2 years ago. The agency hired me. I had no idea you worked there until I saw your hands in the frames. I kept everything. Raw files, EXIF data, timestamps. I just didn't know what to do with it, and I was scared you wouldn't want to see me. Now I know." She opened her laptop and showed me a folder of hundreds of images. My hands kneading dough, my fingers placing mint leaves on a tartlet, my face a little out of focus in the background, but mine. I stared at them and felt a flame kindle inside me. Not anger, but inspiration. "We're opening a pop-up," I said. "What?" "A pop-up, a temporary restaurant, right here in this loft. We'll serve the same dishes Gabriel does, but renamed. Each name will be a satire on him. Foam of arrogance, mousse of empty promises, the duck leg he claimed. And you'll be the art director. We'll hang your photos on the walls. We'll show everyone who actually built Gabriel."
Iris smiled that smile I remembered from childhood, the one she wore whenever we were about to pull some wild stunt. "This is insane." I agree, but insanity is the only thing that works when the truth gets squeezed. "I like it," she said. "When do we start?" "Yesterday."
We launched into motion so fast, I sometimes couldn't keep track. Iris took on the legal and organizational side. She registered a temporary business under her name so I wouldn't be exposed too soon, got a catering permit, leased extra equipment from contacts in the industry. She also came up with the name, SALT. Just SALT. No surnames, no titles. Because salt is the foundation of everything, she explained. Without it, even the most exquisite dish is grass. With it, art. I agreed, though a part of me felt self-conscious about the simplicity. Later, I understood how right she was. Simplicity punches pretension right in the gut. Meanwhile, I transformed the technical binders into a menu. It was delicate work. I needed the dishes to be recognizable enough that guests who knew Gabriel's kitchen would instantly get the reference, but the names and descriptions had to become satire. I cut the menu down to 7 items, 3 starters, 2 mains, 2 desserts, keeping the most iconic dishes the public associated with Gabriel. The duck leg confit with celery root puree became the duck leg he claimed. The description read, braised duck with celery root seasoned with years of plagiarism and served on a bed of unpaid royalties. The chocolate sphere with mango cream turned into sphere of lies. A hollow dark chocolate globe filled with a hot confession shatters under the spoon of truth. The signature white asparagus mousse became foam of arrogance, an airy substance that mimics the presence of a brain, deflates after prolonged contact with reality. I rewrote those descriptions a dozen times until they had the right sting without tipping into outright cruelty. Iris laughed out loud reading them, then said, if he sues for defamation, we'll frame the complaint and make a new dish, cutlet of wounded pride. At the same time, we spun up word of mouth. Iris, with her connections in food media, she'd shot for several magazines and knew every critic in town, sent out a dozen anonymous invitations. The teaser read, former sous chef of a Michelin-starred restaurant, identity temporarily under wraps, opens a pop-up in a warehouse. 7 dishes you'll recognize, 1 revelation you won't forget. It was enough to hook people. Within a day, 30 guests had signed up, more than our space could seat. We set up extra tables, borrowed chairs from artist neighbors, rented plates and linens, and on a Friday, exactly 1 month after I was fired, SALT opened.
I remember that first night in every detail. The way you remember a first kiss or your first paycheck. Iris had transformed the space so it took your breath away. On the exposed brick walls hung her giant black and white photos, my hands with a chef's knife, my fingers placing microgreens, my profile vanishing in steam above a stock pot, and beneath each one a small plaque with the date and a quote taken from Gabriel's interviews. Under the shot of my hands whisking a mousse, for example, was the line, I was sitting in Provence, sipping Bordeaux, and suddenly it hit me. Dated 6 months later than the photo. Guests noticed these juxtapositions, glanced at one another, pulled out their phones. The lighting was low and warm, candles flickered in recycled wine bottles, and the air smelled of fresh bread, rosemary, and a faint citrus note Iris had diffused. Guests, mostly strangers, came in from the cold, stomped snow off their boots, and looked around with curiosity. I was in the tiny kitchen, carved out of an old darkroom, calling orders to 3 cooks I'd hired from among former colleagues Gabriel had fired over the previous year. Those cooks knew me, trusted me, and when I called them and said, guys, I'm starting something, I need hands, they didn't hesitate. By 9 o'clock, the room was full. I peeked through the pass and saw people eating my food, exchanging glances, taking notes. A young food blogger Iris had invited was filming every course on her phone, captioning in real time, y'all, I'm not kidding, this duck leg is identical to Gabrielle's. Actually, it's better. By midnight, when the last course had gone out, the guests gave a standing ovation. I stepped out of the kitchen, drying my hands on a towel, and was met with a wave of applause. Iris hugged me, and I leaned against the wall, closed my eyes, and exhaled. It had worked. It was working. The next day, the first posts hit social media. Anonymous pop-up salt, the food event of the season.
Mystery chef cooking Michelin-level food in a Bushwick warehouse. Who's behind salt? And why does it taste so much like Gabriel? The word-of-mouth machine Iris had set in motion spun on its own. People shared links, booked weeks in advance, and one day, a food critic from the very magazine that printed Gabrielle's Provence interview showed up. He came incognito, unannounced, ordered the full tasting, and ate alone in the corner, scribbling in a notebook. I recognized him, but didn't let on. The next day, he posted a blistering review of Gabrielle, comparing it to Salt, where the same dishes were not merely replicated, but reimagined with the soul that's been catastrophically missing from the original. He hinted that a star dims when the true creator leaves the kitchen. That stung Gabrielle worse than any lawsuit could have.
Gabriel showed up 3 weeks after Salt opened. We were in the middle of a Saturday dinner service when someone hammered on the loft door. Iris went to open it and found Gabriel on the doorstep with 2 men in suits. Lawyers, as it turned out. He was in his full persona. Expensive coat, scarf, hair shellacked. But his face wasn't TV ready. It was mean and panicked at the same time. "Ivy!" he shouted, trying to peer past Iris. "I know you're in there. Stop this circus. You're violating your contract and misleading the public. We're filing." I dried my hands and walked out of the kitchen into the dining room. The place went silent. About 10 guests froze, spoons halfway to their mouths. I walked to the doorway, but didn't invite them in. I stopped in the threshold, arms folded. "Gabriel," I said calmly, "you've come to discuss my contract. Fine, let's discuss it. My contract doesn't contain a non-compete clause, and it says nothing that would prevent me from cooking dishes I developed independently before and during my employment, as long as they're not literal copies of your current menu. They aren't. Different names, different plating. You can check." One of the lawyers stepped forward, adjusted his glasses, and spoke in a practiced tone. "Ms. Keller, we contend that your menu is misleading consumers by creating a false association with the Gabriel brand. We have grounds for a suit of unfair competition." "Grounds?" I turned to him. "Have you tasted my food yourself? Are you confident your client can prove in court that these recipes are his intellectual property? Because I can produce my technical binders, dated photos, witness statements from colleagues. And I also remember Gabriel tasting the black currant sauce for the first time and saying, 'Do whatever, that's your zone, not his.'" Gabriel's face flushed. "You were an employee. Everything you made inside my restaurant belongs to the restaurant." "Really?" I pulled a folded sheet from my pocket. "Here's a printout of my employment agreement. The intellectual property clause refers to dishes developed at the express direction of the executive chef and included in the restaurant's menu. It doesn't say anything about recipes I brought with me, and it sure doesn't say I can't cook them after I leave. You want to argue about that? Let's do it in court. I think the press would be thrilled." I said all of this evenly, almost lazily, but inside every nerve was humming. The lawyers exchanged a look. They'd clearly already calculated that a noisy lawsuit would hurt their client far more than it would help, especially with articles piling up about how his ex-sous chef was cooking the same food, but with heart. Gabriel's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. I kept going. "You can sue, Gabriel, but then Discovery will pull in all my records, all my binders, all the evidence of who actually stood at the stove while you gave interviews. You want that on the public record? Go ahead. In the meantime, goodbye. I have a dinner service."
I turned and walked back into the kitchen. A minute later, Iris closed the door. Gabriel and his lawyers left, and we didn't see them again. The guests, holding their breath, slowly started clapping, and the blogger was already filming. "You guys, you won't believe what just happened!" The scene circulated online, but we didn't stoke the scandal. We just kept cooking. The effect, however, was already rolling. Gabriel's reputation was buckling. Critics openly wrote that Gabriel had lost its spark after I left, and that Salt was the new must-visit. Laura, my old server friend, kept me filled in. The kitchen was chaos. Leo couldn't keep up. Gabriel screamed all day. Turnover spiked. A couple of months later, the annual Michelin assessment was released. Gabriel kept its star, but with a note: cooking quality is inconsistent, service has deteriorated, the restaurant needs rethinking. It was as good as a sentence. Sponsors got nervous. Reservations plummeted. A few months after that, Gabriel announced a temporary closure for renovation, but everyone knew it was over. I didn't gloat. I just felt a quiet satisfaction that the truth had finally become visible to anyone willing to see it. Salt kept going, and Iris and I had already started scouting a permanent space. Half a year later, we opened in a real storefront in Williamsburg, with the same aesthetic and the same team. My sister became not just the art director, but my second self in the front of house. I finally got to cook not for someone else's glory, but for my own name. One day, while unpacking old boxes, I found Iris's childhood letter and framed it near the host stand. It became our talisman. You know, people often ask me if I regret not leaving sooner, if I wasted all those years on a thankless man. I tell them no, because those years made me the chef I am, and they also gave me back my sister, and the understanding that revenge isn't a scream, it's a quiet return to yourself. Gabriel called me a kitchen hand and believed he was the art, but art, as it turned out, was always in the hands that held the knife and knew when to add salt. So now I want to ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have trusted a sister you hadn't seen in 17 years to start over from nothing? And what do you think is worse for a man who stole your work, a public unmasking, or the slow realization that without you, he's hollow? Drop your thoughts in the comments. From where I stand, this story isn't about revenge. It's about the way life finally tastes when you stop being someone else's shadow. And believe me, that's a dish worth trying.